Okay, so joining us now is Kevin, an OG from our growth team, to talk about user acquisition and how it has changed this year and what are the impacts going forward.
Hey, Kev, thanks for joining us on the pod. Excited to get some of your expertise here. So, we're digging into kind of the meta themes that we see for 2024 and kind of looking that through our kind of three different pillars of growth or uptick. So traditionally as creative, data, and user acquisition. So we're bringing you in here as our user acquisition expert and want to get your take on some of the meta themes that you've been seeing impacting the space from a user acquisition perspective in 2024. So, Xander, what are some of the big themes that we want to get Kevin's take on here?
What are sort of the overall most important things as it relates to adoption of new technology? What are the key channels? How have they changed overall? To what extent is UA still a mobile-first enterprise? And to what extent are we able to go cross-platform? And how are we seeing it on PC? I think those are sort of the key overarching themes, but we'll dig into each one individually.
There's been a lot that's happened this year, which I think is really exciting for us. I'm speaking a lot from the uptick lens and seeing what we see. So, definitely can speak to a lot of both the Web 2 and the Web 3 stuff that's happening on our teams. I'll start at sort of the top level things I'm seeing, and then we can dive into anything that we want to. But I think one thing that happened more recently, or I guess within this year, is the SKAN 4.0 transition. And I originally expected that we might get a little bit more traction. We're getting some more granularity of data, some more interesting ways to, I don't want to say bypass the privacy threshold, but Apple is sort of willing to open the gates a little bit more into seeing what kinds of data you can get. I think, historically it's always been the issue with SKAN network, but from the work that we've done with our clients, even with that release of SKAN 4.0, we're not actually really seeing anybody adopt any of that tech, which is kind of a shame, but I think it speaks to sort of the complications around the setup and the diagnostics and then the actual analysis of this brand new data set that's still pretty nascent, all things considered. And personally, I view this as a really big blue sea. We have the opportunity to jump ahead, take advantage of this new data that only some teams are willing to begin working with. I think within our space, working with the people that we work with, we deal with a lot of folks who are very data-driven and very focused on the minutia and the logic and statistics around the data, less so than the perhaps larger organizations who have more budget to throw against billboards online, right? So we have a lot of teams that would probably be really excited to use this data as we're learning how to crack it. So SKAN 4.0 not taking off in the way that I thought, but yeah, still very much a blue ocean for us.
Yeah, let's dig into that a little bit. I agree with everything you said, Kevin. The solutions that Apple has provided, and while they're getting better, the theme remains consistent that these are solutions built by engineers or marketers. And there's this huge ocean between the technical understanding required to make the most of these solutions and the training and skill set of the marketers that are tasked with executing on it. And what I've seen practically in my interactions with teams, and it sounds like you're kind of echoing this, is it just kind of becomes a non-starter. The wall is so insurmountable. There's a lot of teams that we start working with or talk to, or it's just they've basically done nothing to attack the problem, because it's asking a lot of actually developers and marketers to properly utilize SKAN for measurement, for optimization, for reporting, and a lot of teams just don't have those resources, particularly within their marketing teams.
I think it's really funny that we're moving into a world where more and more agency is generally being taken away from advertisers in the form of algorithmic buying on these social networks, but you have to be super technical with SKAN. It's a complete divide from the way that the industry is moving and how Apple is enforcing this privacy framework. Yeah.
I think there was a window for Apple to force behavioral change in the ecosystem, right? There was they pushed through the early SKAN products, and they were so broken. People basically found ways to either stop advertising because they couldn't figure out what was going on, or they just found workarounds. And that's sort of the key thing that we did at Uptick. We found ways to basically deal with modeling iOS installs without using the SKAN conversion values. And I think that's sort of the really key thing is okay, now how do you force a whole ecosystem to adopt? When it was existential to them, they did, but now they're back in steady state to give you an incremental improvement and then expect the entire industry to retool its entire framework. It's just not going to happen unless there's a real existential need. And so I think that's why we're not seeing much adoption overall.
Well, let's talk about that a slightly different way. We basically see that iOS user acquisition advertising channels are in two buckets today. There's those that are following the rules and highly affected by Apple's policy and technical changes, which is primarily Google and Meta today. And then we call them smaller ad networks, but now a number of these are large publicly traded companies, Unity, AppLovin, et cetera, where I don't think I'm breaking any news here. They're using probabilistic modeling within the MMPs. It's just fingerprinting. Sorry, that's what it is. And it's on paper explicitly against the policy and intent of what Apple has built, but no one's doing anything about it. So it's like if large publicly traded companies, this can be their primary revenue driver, it's clear that like Apple has access to the information that this is happening and that there's nothing, at least today, taking place to enforce this. So it is interesting to see that kind of split within the U8 ecosystem. Do you guys think that will continue, or do you predict that like at some point like there will be more enforcement here from Apple?
I'm of two minds of this. Well, one, they saw how much their app ecosystem got damaged when they came out with ATT and SKAN initially. And so I think they are very reticent, especially as their hardware business comes under pressure to damage their new cash cow, which is their services business. That being said, it was clear that even in the first place, this was not an economic decision. Right, they made this. It seemed like this was like a religious decision for them, where they're like, Tim Cook has been very public about not liking Mark Zuckerberg, not liking his business model, and it seems like it came from like these people clashed and they tried to put the business. And I've seen that in the newspaper, and I've talked to people who are sort of on the inside there, and it seems like that's what happened. And so I don't know if it becomes a religious decision at some point, they're like, we're just going to do this, because that's totally possible. But they're a little more overbarreled than they've been in the past, and so who knows?
Maybe this is actually a good segue to go into AI, which is another one of our big themes that we're talking about throughout these segments. One thing that I saw tangentially over the course of the last year is all these ad networks and ad tech providers in the growth marketing ecosystems overnight were AI companies. Overnight, like some of them literally like rebranded their domains to .ai or put AI into their product name. On the front lines, though, it seemed like nothing actually changed. So is that true? Are all of these like, did everything turn into AI this year?
Honestly, it feels that way. I don't think there's really been a massive change. I think when you say the words AI, they're just buzzwords now. Like, I don't actually think that people are necessarily implementing like language learning models into the bidding strategies or what have you of these companies. They've all built their own algorithmic, quote unquote, machine learning models to help find users that they think will correlate to, your success and their success. So it's I guess AI in the loose sense of that. What's interesting about AI in UA is more so maybe how we begin to interact with products and networks through a layer of AI. It doesn't really exist right now, but obviously like the vision is very bright, right? Like, I want to set up some campaign, make me this campaign with these creatives that I have, and et cetera, et cetera. I don't need to go and like fuss with the UI. And potentially, if there's a third-party layer that sits on top of that, you're then able to disseminate campaigns across multiple networks simultaneously. Really gives economies of scale to your teams. Hint, something that we're working on. But yeah, like so. But yeah, so like I think it's super exciting what AI could bring to the space. I think also, having said that, we've on the team worked with a number of products that are branded as AI. And like you said, Warren, I think everybody is so excited to move into this space in some way. And it's a really new space. And that comes with a lot of unsolved edge cases, a lot of still problematic implementations that don't actually save you time and energy. I think what we're finding is that AI has a tendency to not stick to the designated set of rules that we've all decided we want to stick to when we're doing campaigns and things like that. And so when it breaks those rules, you need someone to still rein it in and say, hey, like, let me teach you that this is not to be messed with, right? Like, we have this kind of system in place for everybody's understanding. A good example is like campaign naming or like creative naming or things like that, right? And as you get algorithms that maybe go deeper than that and look at the properties of the campaigns and tag those, properties of creatives, tag those, we've been getting a lot of, like I said, edge cases that force us to then manually intervene, which is sort of defeating the purpose of AI. So for now, it's super new. A lot of, I think, issues with the tech, but the vision is super exciting. And I think would give all of us like much greater ability to do the strategic element of user acquisition.
Yeah, and I'm being a little snarky when I'm making fun of all the companies for rebranding their anything that smells remotely like an algorithm is AI. But to your point earlier, Kevin, like, I think it's safe to say, like, you've been in the game now for a while. Like, the algorithms from all these ad networks have gotten a lot better over the years, and it is kind of like evolving the role of the UA manager. Like, what are your thoughts on, how you've seen the optimization algorithms and your job and your team's job kind of evolve over the last year or so?
Yeah, totally. It's funny because when I was working back at Nexon, like doing algorithmic bidding on Google really was like being a shaman a tea leaf reader, like rolling the dice and hoping you understood or, what the outcome was based on some arbitrary set of like signals that the algorithm was showing you, right? It was kind of like being an interpreter and a translator at that time. This is like probably in like 2017-ish, 2018, when we were beginning to see the move away from really targeted bidding into the what they called at the time the UAC campaigns, right? So I actually think that UA managers have been doing this for a long time. This idea of interacting with AI, and I know a lot of people talk about how AI is going to move people from being like the executors to learning how to prompt AI, and in that same vein, that's what I think UA managers have been doing with algorithms like Facebook and Google. It's always been about, I'm giving you some inputs. And if you spit out an output to me that is slightly under my goal, how do I know what lever I'm supposed to be able to pull?
Right.
Based on, like, let's say on Google, what network, YouTube, search, display you're spending on primarily, what my bid is, how the spend and whatever has been pacing out. So yeah, I think definitely we've been moving in this direction. And now it's just becoming more ubiquitous that like every network is moving towards a black box that you then have to become an interpreter for. You have to learn how to translate the results there and how that should guide your lever pulling on the input side.
What I think is still very much a reality that we're seeing, it's interesting because, Kevin, you and I have worked together for a long time. Like in earlier years, there'd be a lot of just kind of like grinding it out in spreadsheets, like manually adjusting bids because the algorithms were pretty dumb. They existed, but like a human could clearly do better. Like what it seems like today, two things are simultaneously true from my perspective, at least, and curious if you agree. Like that type of work adds a lot less value. There's a lot less kind of edge for humans to be gained in that specific process, if any. Simultaneously, absolutely, we see a lot of projects we plug into, and this is not to hype up the team, like we have a very good team, but just like if you put a competent operator in charge of your user acquisition, even though it's all algorithmic, like it's like we can see when we work on games like, oh yeah, we started working this week. We see the numbers go up. And sometimes this is even before like our creative and other things we know move the needle come online. So that's all to say, like, I think there is a mental shortcut that like operators are no longer relevant to get successful outcomes, but most teams are still really struggling to solve the UA puzzle. And there is still a lot of nuance and edge that can be gained by a savvy operator, like managing these campaigns.
Yeah.
I think that workflow's just changed. I don't know. Thoughts?
Totally agree.
Yeah, it also comes down to data to a bit, right? Like the main thing, I think we'll talk about this later in the data section. It's like you can't pull the levers like you used to. The algorithms are pulling the levers. But then number two, for the operator, yes, there's a differential that can be gained by the operator, but it's also, can they pull in all the different data across disparate data sources to actually understand which levers pull and why? And so the thing you're saying earlier, Kevin, about this being, animal husbandry, it's like, to what extent do you boil that down to a schema that it becomes more like science, less like art?
Yeah. Totally. And to that point, it was very much a science in the past with doing all these spreadsheets and having very rigorous formulas and decision-making behind that is now abstracted by these black boxes. But I think what's important about, at least for me, my own experience having done those spreadsheets, is that without that, you really have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. You don't really understand the way that the algorithm is interacting with those supply to deliver you your results. And I think that's the thing that kind of gets lost for maybe a lot of these newer teams that are coming into the space now after not having the ability to have learned in this very data-heavy regime of UA. Is we're at a point now where if you don't really understand how many hoops this algorithm is jumping through and what exactly it's doing, how are you ever supposed to understand what it's giving you and why it's making those decisions and what kinds of levers it's pulling? So I think a lot of our interaction with networks now is more so like asking them about the way that their algorithm perceives performance and what actions it takes based on the subset of actions that we know we can take and the types of inputs that we know already do exist, right? So the previous experience is very important in understanding the current state of UA.
Right. And Xander, you touched, I think, on another important point in passing that's worth double clicking on, which is like a lot of the differences that I see in effective user acquisition operators versus less experienced is working on kind of the nitty gritty data piping and data telemetry piece of things. It kind of comes back to this idea of like algorithm whispering of like, You know, we were talking to one of our partners earlier this week where we basically reverse engineered that they had done something different with their SKAN setup on the game side that was feeding the algorithm different signals and causing different outcomes in marketing efficacy, and then work backwards from that, troubleshoot what went wrong on the game side. But there has to be, like, if you're only looking at it from the perspective of the data you see from your Facebook campaigns or whatever, you're not going to uncover those things. You have to go a little bit more under the hood of like, what is the piping that's sending the signaling? What has changed with that? And the job is just really changing. It's kind of like expanding outward from pulling the levers to the other two pillars we talk about of the data side and the creative side as the main areas of impact.
We have a few minutes left. I wanted to talk a little bit about channel-specific insight that we found. And I think my favorite and most absurd story is the story of Meta and how they've been the king of mobile UA forever. And somehow, with all their cuts, they're falling on their face in terms of the capacity you spend with them. And so I'm not in the trenches as much as you guys are. Guys, story time about Meta. What's up?
Yeah, so I've had a pretty few bad experiences with Meta just in terms of being unresponsive and stuff. But most recently, they rolled out this program where I think they're kind of doing like call center type support again. You can click on a button on their dashboard to go get one-on-one support. I clicked on this button. I was like, yo, just give me like 45 minutes and call me at this number. It's not even like a web chat or like a web meeting. It's like they call you on your phone, which is bizarre. So I'm like, okay, here, take my number. And three different reps I've never heard of before, all booked 45 minutes on my calendar for the time that I wanted. I was like, okay, this is very much overwhelming, like too much. I was like, let me cancel a couple of these or just like say no to them, go with just this random one. And then that person canceled on me like the day before. So then I had to like uncancel one of the other ones, and then nobody ended up calling me. I had 3 people on my calendar and nobody ended up calling me. I was like, well, how am I supposed to get a hold of anybody? We're trying to actively spend money with you guys. I'm just having some problems figuring out how I can do that. You know I want to. I even put it in my little message to you guys, my little, note to us to tell us about your problem. But yeah, it's just been historically bad levels of service. I know we've talked about it in the past, but the trend is just kind of getting worse, and it feels like this one-on-one thing that they have is something that's new, but still broken, and it's still bad, and it's just not getting any better.
And Kev, like, this is not a standalone story. I mean, I've talked to numbers of different people, both internally at Uptick and externally, who would have nothing to do with Uptick, who are having the same problem. And this is actually like really kind of hilarious. It's like, this is cuts going too far, it seems like. It's like they had a money printing machine. And to be clear, they're still printing money. But the fact that your people are trying to hand the money and they can't is like a wild situation.
I've gone Karen a couple of times on social media channels about how bad the support has gotten. No one from Meta has ever responded. And we're not the biggest company in the world, but like we manage millions of dollars in UA spend every month. And historically, like Meta's been top 1 to top 3 of those channels. But even for us, we can't get support for new game launches and things that we're doing. And they have this really archaic system. And I was going to go into a little soapbox about this because I'm hoping they listen and do something about this, where it's like you can't get support for a game that doesn't have any historical spend. So if you're planning a global game launch, there's no one who will actually help you with that. And we've had the reps that we do work with tell us, like, I will literally get in trouble if I help you with this game. And the best you can do is nominate it for support in a following quarter. And you can only nominate things for the spring quarter in like a couple of specific weeks in the fall. And it's like this super archaic system where it's like, okay, cool, I launched my game 6 months ago and now I've spent several $1 million. Cool, now I can get customer support. But like at that point, I've already launched the game and worked through all the key issues. So shame on Meta. Like, this is like the worst the platform has ever been, just as far as like enabling spend. And it's just leading us to spend a lot more with competitors, to be candid.
Which is wild. One interesting find that Kevin and I found as we were digging through the data is YouTube finally launched their ATT prompt last year, and we expected that to have a big impact. Kev, do you want to talk through a little bit about what the impact has been on ATT and YouTube?
Yeah, sure.
And also, Kevin, can you explain that in plain English for maybe like our less spectacle issues, like what Xander just said and what that means?
Yeah, totally. Come on, Xander. You gotta make this digestible, man. So ATT, the app tracking transparency prompt, usually shows up in all apps asking you like, hey, do you want your information to be trapped? And historically, we've needed users to click on that prompt and answer yes twice. Once in the app that they are seeing the ad in, and once for the app that they are like landing in. So whatever app we're buying traffic for, they also need to agree to be tracked there. And so historically, YouTube did not have this prompt. And so all traffic from YouTube basically was exempt from being tracked. And so you would never be able to get any deterministic traffic from there because there's literally no way to get a quote unquote double opt-in user, somebody that you can track because they hit yes on that prompt twice.
So it's buying completely blind any inventory on YouTube because there's not even an opportunity for the user to consent to being tracked. So just completely blind spend on iOS.
There's no way, which means no revenue signal, which is really important.
Right.
We have no idea if we're making any money from YouTube.
Yeah, it was definitely more of the wild, wild west at that time. But now with this ATT prompt, actually when we were talking about this, I was like, oh, I don't know how much of an impact it's actually had. But looking at it, we have a factor within our system that allows us to understand what the volume of deterministic double opt-in users is relative to
the consent ratio, right?
Yeah, the consent ratio. That's a good way to think about it. And that number dropped. The numbers aren't really going to mean anything to y'all probably, but like 70 to 20, right? Which means like it's essentially like a drop down to 1/3 or less than 1/3 of uncertainty. Yeah.
What's it? 3x, basically 3x more users are opting in from Google as a channel overall.
Yes.
From before this until now.
Right, because another fun fact about buying user acquisition on Google is you can't pick like what subsets of inventory that you buy from. So it's like you might be getting from Google search where people can consent to being tracked so you get data, or the algorithm might just say, hey, today you get everything from YouTube, and surprise, like that's all completely blind. So it made your UA data like almost completely unusable for Google. So that's when, Kevin, when you're speaking to like these numbers lowering, what it basically, to phrase another way, it basically means we going from that huge pocket of YouTube inventory providing zero signal to now we actually get a meaningful enough signal that we have been able to like scale and measure and do the thing on Google in a meaningful way on iOS. And we couldn't do this like for years practically. So that's been a huge development this year.
Yeah, I think one other thing to think about too is YouTube, at least for me, as a YouTube user on mobile, I haven't gotten that prompt yet because I think I already had YouTube installed beforehand. They probably are showing this prompt more to certain categories of users, like maybe new users. So I think this amount of double opt-in, the percentage of double opt-in users is likely to keep going up over the next couple of years as we get more people into that ecosystem who otherwise have not been treated with that yet.
So we went from totally blind to partially blind.
Yeah.
For buying on Google, and next year we might go to only slightly blurry.
I mean, it's getting better. Yeah, I think the last thing I wanted to say is just that generally on all of our channels, iOS, like we still see so much potential there. When you look at the like CPMs, for example, of Facebook, Android versus Facebook, iOS, like iOS is still very low. In the past, it was like 3-4x Android. Now it's maybe 1x, maybe 0.8x for all of their partners that we're working with. So if we think there's the same value, like it's not like iOS users got worse. So clearly there's value there, and we are able to find it. And I'm really excited about all these different, not only internal initiatives that we have, but then also like the landscape is changing. There's a lot to catch up on. I think that's what keeps it fun and exciting and gives us the ability to kind of stay ahead of the game.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Kevin, because that's an important thing to call out. So we did spend a lot of time complaining about the obstacles brought by iOS. Guess what? Like all your competition has the same obstacles too. And like we talked about up top, like a lot of them are just checking out and giving up on iOS as far as like doing a data-driven performance marketing approach. So like if you can build out the proper tooling or deal with some of the noise and ways to work around it, like we're finding tons of opportunity there, and we buy a lot more in iOS than Android because of that. So an obstacle is also an opportunity anytime in user acquisition because it's your opponent's obstacle as well.
Sweet. Thank you guys very much. Really appreciate you having me on.
Thanks for your time, Kev. If any of this is interesting to you and you need some help scaling your game, you can reach us through our website. As we say, we do all the hard work to scale games. We can plug in, support your team, and we build really cool technology that helps make all of that easier and more efficient. So if that is helpful to you, reach us through our website. It's upptic.com, upptic.com.
Talk soon.